Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America. Thanks for joining me today and hope you're having a great week. So, quick business. I have two shout outs for two new Patreons. So, it's Kevin and Rhonda, and thank you for joining the Patreon. If you wish to join the Patreon, which the Patreon is basically you get bonus content, and there's so much bonus content that's not on the channel that's already out that you get access to. And then you get one free, or not one free, but I put out one bonus episode like monthly. And I do let like the Patreons just have a voice in what I'm going to do for them. So it's always like something like I just did Jack the Ripper type thing, but I've done Zodiac, the Long Island serial killer, that kind of thing. So join the Patreon. And also, I do have merch finally out. I'm working on the t-shirts, but I do have my Unexplained America hats. So go to unexplainedamerica.com and you can get access to email me, to the merch, to like all my social media contacts. So yes, so just go on the website or just go in my show notes to contact me. And I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of the platforms. So find me, leave me a comment, please. So today's episode is on the Phoenix Lights, the UFO sightings. Now we will discuss the event, like what it is, the aftermath, and then all the possibilities put forth over the years by people, speculations, whatever. So we're going to get started. Now, on March 13th of 1997, on a very clear, moonless night, Dr. Lynn Ketai, a family physician, she was living in Paradise Valley portion of Phoenix, Arizona. So she is stargazing, and I should say maybe comet gazing on this Thursday night, okay? That night, many people were staring at the sky, looking for the appearance of what's called the Hale-Bopp comet. Now, this comet was a comet discovered in 1995, and it was very visible during this time frame there in Arizona, there in 1997. So Lynn was a stargazer. She lived in kind of the mountainside there in Phoenix. She had an amazing view. She had kind of a panoramic kind of deck situation and windows. Like she had a very good setup for viewing the stars, viewing the skies. And she was very familiar with that. Like Phoenix is an area that kind of has a lot going on in the skies, and we'll talk about that. But she had discussed in interviews and such that she witnessed an actual UFO in 1995. And she was pretty much a skeptic as far as, yeah, aliens, extraterrestrials, that kind of thing. Like she says so herself. But also just 2 months before the March event in January of 1997, she did see 6 amber orbs in the sky, above another 3 orbs, she stated. But on that Thursday night, what she witnessed would change her life and kind of completely change her life as far as what she did with her work and everything else. So her and her husband, and he is a medical doctor, like they witnessed some lights there, and this is the March 13th, hovering in the southwestern distance. So they see 6 amber orbs in a row hovering over what's called the Estrella Mountains. Now, Lynn runs to get her 35mm camera. And by the time she gets back with her camera, now there's only 3 lights left. So now Lynn and her husband, they are not alone in this sighting. Not alone in the least. Now, that same night, literally 10,000 or so people in Phoenix would call into the newspapers, the airport, which was Sky Harbor International. They would call 911. Of course, they're calling, everybody. And they would even call into the Air Force Base. There was an Air Force Base right there in Phoenix, Luke Air Force Base, which we'll get into. So they're reporting in what they're seeing. They're seeing these lights. Now, what they would describe would be the largest documented UFO sighting in the United States. Just massive. Just how many people, what they saw, just everything about it. And the descriptions that night pretty much remained the same. It was pretty uniform for the witnesses. So they witnessed a triangular shaped object with amber lights. Now, in videos, and we'll talk about that, they kind of look just bright, but the lights were bright. They were described as being beautiful. Now, these lights also were described as not being like beaming, just kind of like, I guess, orb-like was how some people, and Dr. Lynn Kitai, how she described it, because they were kind of self-contained lights, okay? They weren't like beam lights, not like we think of like headlights. Now, the lights appeared to be attached to a hull that was V-shaped, like a V-shaped vessel or a boomerang, okay? These lights were moving extremely slow, like painstakingly slow, like slower than anything that anyone had ever witnessed. And the lights were extremely quiet. Now, witnesses would see two lights trailing this V shape that was comprised of 5 lights. Like some people said 5 lights, some people said up to 9 were visible, and I don't know if they were counting like all the lights, like the trailing lights. And then some were saying, 5 to 6. But the craft appeared to be very low in the atmosphere, like no more than 3,000 kind of foot altitude they're going on. Yeah, on top of all of this, the lights on this said V-shaped hole were huge. Like people estimated the span object in the sky to be at least a mile wide. A mile. That's huge. Like huge. So it was big, it was slow, it was beautiful, it was quiet, it was unlike anything that anyone had ever seen. And Dr. Kitai would even describe just feeling, she felt a sense of peace. There wasn't like there wasn't any fear or any worry in it, just a sense of comfort, of peace in what she was seeing. Like that's how she felt about it. Now, the witnesses were all kinds of people. I mean, different kinds of people, different walks of life. And we're going to get into this, like, very different areas even. So the types of people that were calling in were anywhere from pilots, teachers, bus drivers, kids, adults, all, middle-aged, like all of the factors, all of the people, all different types. And there were actual commercial pilots and air traffic controllers that witnessed this event that we're going to get into. So the Sky Harbor Airport there is literally almost in the heart of the city of Phoenix, like almost dead center. And within the airport, the airspace there is like a 30-mile diameter around the airport, and it is a Class B restricted airspace. And this type of airspace is designated for very busy airports and for, safety purposes. And all aircraft are supposed to announce themselves if they enter this airspace, okay? Now, the airport, people were calling into the airport, and they noted zero. Dr. Kitai talks about calling in to the airport, had they seen anything? And so they have zero aircraft, zero knowledge of what this craft could be. Now, it's just interesting. And themselves, so they're wondering what this is. They don't know anything other than this is a UFO, and also that this was not showing up on their radar. Like, this craft is not showing up on their radar, okay? And of course, as we know, UFO just stands for Unidentified Flying Object, okay? So that's all they know, and not on radar. Crazy. So Dr. Kitai even mentioned that, again, she had called the airport. She actually got a hold of someone that put her in contact with an air traffic controller who did see the event just like her. And just like her, knew absolutely nothing about it, like no clue, was wondering, like, what is this? Where did it come from? Now, the whole event actually started with sightings it began kind of in Nevada and California, and the sightings actually began around 5:30 p.m. on the 13th. Now, people in their reporting, it spanned all the way into New Mexico and down into Mexico. And the reporting of the lights lasted up until about 2 a.m. on the 14th. Now, some witness sightings lasted up to 45 minutes. So, literally, meaning one witness witnessed the lights, was able to see the lights for 45 minutes. And some even reported the craft going directly over their heads. I mean, this, again, when we say slow moving, it's more of like a hovercraft or something. I mean, it's crazy to think about. So even the actor and amateur pilot, Kurt Russell, had the same experience. So some of you may not know who Kurt Russell is, depending on your age, but he is, I don't even know if they're married. I think they've just been together forever, but Goldie Hawn, I think they are married, but Goldie Hawn is his wife, let's say. And anyway, I think he's famous too, but like, of course, they have Kate Hudson. She has Kate Hudson, the actress. And then, so Kurt Russell was actually piloting his plane, and he had Oliver Hudson, his stepson, in there with him. And as they're landing, like they're coming in to land at the Sky Harbor Airport there in Phoenix, and they're landing around 8:45. And he sees, like Kurt Russell sees the lights. And so he lets the air traffic controller, like in the tower, know, like there are these lights. What are they? So he saw them even. He will later discuss in interviews as having seen the actual Phoenix lights. Like he will be like, yeah, I saw them. Crazy. So again, people weren't necessarily fearful. Like they were calling in, of course, to law enforcement, like more or less just letting them know what they saw. Like they were astonished. Like the people that viewed it were amazed. They felt like it was nothing that they had ever seen with their eyes. Like they were in awe. They were excited. Like it was like some type of miracle that they were witnessing. So there was like an awe factor there, definitely. But they just wanted to know or document, like, this is what I saw. This is what I'm seeing. So now immediately the authorities, like the police and such, were calling on the local Air Force Base for answers. So Luke Air Force Base is literally only 22 miles from downtown Phoenix. So this, of course, felt obviously like that would be my first go-to. Like, surely the Air Force Base would know what's going on, should know. And just a little background. So Luke Air Force Base was actually called Home of the Fighter Pilot. They literally had what was called the 56 Fighter Wing Base Group, which is kind of like the 56 Fighter Wing is, from what I understood, the largest Lockheed fighter jets training center. So it's kind of like the equivalency of what the Navy calls their Top Gun. Okay, so it's a big deal in fighter jets, the home of the fighter jets. Now, in 1997, they did have what was called the F-15s that they were training in, and they were developing and starting to train pilots for the F-16s. So these, of course, are actual planes that they were working with. Now, there were, at this time frame, like there were many top secret aircrafts being utilized and developed in 97 range, okay, in that time frame and before. Like you had the X-1, the X-15, and then what was called the Blackbird. So these jets were known for their speed and being able to travel like faster than sound. And so it was like speed, agility, and altitude. So there were a lot of aircrafts obviously coming in and out, and we're talking this Air Force Base is right there. Now, when first questioned, so the Luke Air Force Base, whenever people call them, whenever the authorities got with them, and then this will get higher up and we'll talk about this, but like they just state, we know nothing about this. We did not have any type of aircrafts out at the time or known to be at the time. Like they just shut it down. It wasn't them. They don't know anything about it. Period and period. Like nothing. Now, of course, the city of Phoenix, and the city of Phoenix is pretty big. I think from what I read, it was like 500 square miles of land. Like there's a lot going on there geographically, but there's also a lot of people. Like it's a very big city going on. Now, there was a city councilwoman at the time. Like, she didn't actually see the lights herself, but by the time, like, she gets to her office and is kind of hearing about what's going on, because this is big news. Again, 10,000 people have, witnessed this and are calling in. So she gets to her office, and of course, people are calling into her office. They're calling into the mayor's office, and they just don't know what they're seeing. So her name is like Frances Emma Barwood. Okay, so she kind of wants to seek answers for her constituents. She doesn't know anything about it, but she's like, who can I reach out to? Who do we need to talk to? Evidently, the mayor's office position was to not say anything about it. Like, they didn't want to say anything about it. Now, she reaches out to Senator John McCain, and and she talks about this in an interview, he evidently wrote a letter on her behalf, calling her a constituent, not mentioning that she's, a city councilwoman for Phoenix, but she gets a copy of this letter, writes the letter to the National Archives about the situation, asking them to investigate. And allegedly, I did read some other article that he also wrote a letter to the Luke Air Force Base. And we do know that Senator John McCain, I don't know if anyone remembers, or if you don't know, but he did run for president. He has been a politician for a long time, but he was in, I believe it was, I don't know if he was in the Army. I didn't look this up, or if he's in the Air Force, but he definitely was a serviceman, okay? But long story short, he writes into the National Archives, which the National Archives is not an authority to be able to do anything. They are literally just a documenting service. And so city councilwoman Barwood just felt like this letter was maybe just to appease her, but maybe even to just document what was going on. So, but again, I did find something else in articles that said that, Senator McCain did reach out to the Air Force Base. That was his go-to as far as looking into it. Now, again, so Barwood reaches out to the Luke Air Force Base as well, just wanting answers. So all she's wanting is answers, and she's wanting them to investigate the situation. Like, it's a huge deal. She wanted to look in it for like answers, but for safety purposes, of course. Everyone wants to make sure that there's nothing wrong with the situation. So Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Fornes, she states individuals willing to report UF sightings need to contact their local law enforcement. That since what's called Project Blue Book was shelved in 1969, that the Air Force did not have the budget to get involved with such investigative projects like these. She did add that no UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force in the past was ever an indication of threats to the national security. So basically she's saying, okay, this isn't a big deal, or that's what I'm hearing. Now, Lieutenant Colonel Fornes also noted that anyone looking to see the Project Blue Book activity, which I guess did investigate UFOs in the past before the 1969, could contact the National Archives for those records. Now, Barwood's notes that they, as in the Air Force, is just wishing this to go away. There's like a article Barwood was talking to the press. Like, she's just trying to be like, I don't know what's going on here, but we need to know, and the Air Force is not willing to help us. Now, Barwood would say that she spoke to 700 citizens herself in Phoenix that were eyewitness of the event, and that all of their stories were the same. The V-shaped lights mentioned, she felt like whatever her people were seeing was definitely true, and it was definitely a mystery there going on. Like, she felt very convicted of, this happened, obviously. And again, 10,000s of people saw this. Now, beyond the V-shaped lights some people actually saw was also what Dr. Ketai had mentioned, a line of stationary lights. Now, the stationary lights, we will get into in a bit, did look very similar to military flares seen before and seen since this incident. So there was actually two different light shows, events going on the March 13th. You had the V-shaped light situation that was huge and slow and quiet. And then you had this string of lights, and it was like 6 in a row or so that did kind of blink out and that were over the mountain range. Okay, so you had two different things that people were calling in about. Now, this incident in Phoenix, of course, this is a huge deal. Now, with the amount of people that witnessed this, this was a public outcry to kind of know what this event was. It wasn't like a couple of people witnessed it and were like, hey, I saw something. Like, this was a big to-do because people witnessed it and they documented it. So there were videos or photos, like there was a lot going on. Now, the then governor, his name is Fife Symington. So he was in his second term of governor at the time in 1997. And of course, being the governor, he is the highest lawman in the state. So, of course, his office, you can imagine if the offices of, the city councilwoman Barwood was being called, and then, of course, the mayor's office, then the governor's office was being called. So he was getting tons of calls also, and he stated to, his constituents that he was going to get to the bottom of this. And he himself, had been in the Air Force, and he was stationed at Luke Air Force Base, so he was going to get some answers. Now, on the morning of June 19th, 1997, so just a little bit later after the event, pressure was building from frustrated citizens who wanted answers. And so Governor Fife announced on television that he was ordering a full investigation and would make all the necessary inquiries. He said, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out if it was a UFO. He said in a very serious tone. So like very serious, going to get to the bottom of it. Now, literally later that same day, he gets together he calls a press conference, and he tells the viewers, he comes out on stage. You can actually watch this. I watched it myself. He tells the viewers that he had found the source behind the Phoenix lights. And then out walks a person dressed as like a Hollywood looking alien, like with the huge, I don't even know, this looked like something like a Saturday Night Live character would wear, something. It was ridiculous. And basically, it was his chief of staff, a man named Jay Heeler. So he was escorted onto the stage by public safety police officers. He was handcuffed, and he's handcuffed, wearing a large rubber mask space alien costume and dressed in that kind of seriously, I'll try to post this, it was something cartoonish almost. So the governor presents, he walks up to the governor. The governor presents this extraterrestrial, quote unquote, as the guilty party. He said, now we know who it is. This is who it is. So, laughter fills the room. Senator Symington, he jokes that this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious. So now he went from being, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this, and then he gets to this, like a man dressed, mocking, joking. People were outraged at this. The people that actually witnessed the lights, people like, Dr. Lynn Ketai, they were outraged. They were upset. They had felt like they were being mocked. And this was just absolutely, destructive to the whole, okay, let's investigate this. Let's find out, what's going on type of deal. Now, the situation with this press conference that the governor calls, of course, it makes national press. Like now, across the whole United States, people are seeing this and they're just laughing. They're like, oh, this is a hoax situation. There's nothing to take seriously here. Again, people like, Councilwoman Barwood and Dr. Ketai, they're kind of ticked. They're like, they definitely didn't appreciate making a farce out of the situation, So the governor, as far as his people that actually witnessed this, there was extreme backlash for this stunt. That was just not cool. But as far as the nation was concerned, okay, this is just a hilarious, situation. These people are, quote unquote, seeing aliens and this and that. Like, nothing was taken seriously, like nothing. So now, that was in June. On July 25th of 1997, so just like a month later or whatever, and this was 4 months after the incident, an explanation is issued for the Phoenix Lights. So this explanation comes out, very matter of fact, and this is what the lights were, okay? It said that 8 A-10 ground attack jets were being used on what's called the Barry M. Goldwater Air Force Range, which is a busy desert kind of bombing area about 60 miles southwest of Phoenix, okay? This was an area where the military routinely conducted like night training. And this was according to a Captain Drew Sullins. So he was speaking out as a spokesperson for the Maryland Air National Guard. Maryland. Now the planes, so what's going on? So the planes were dropping high intensity flares from 15,000 feet to illuminate the target area, Sullins said. The flares, they fall slowly by parachute and illuminate a wide area before returning to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson that night. So the planes had been at the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. I'm going to say, maybe I'm saying that wrong. Call me in. They had been there, and then they fly out to this, Barry Goldwater Air Force range to drop the flares. Now, it does say before they headed back, the planes jettisoned all of their remaining flares at high altitude, which would have created what one pilot called one hell of a light show. Now, the planes were in Arizona to begin with, because this was the Maryland Air National Guard, by the way. So they were in Arizona as part of what's called Operation Snowbird, which does in fact, it is a situation where aircraft from northern bases, like from northern states where they have a lot of bad weather, they come out to Arizona during the time frame of November to April. So this explanation is just a little too convenient for, Councilwoman Barwood. She had been pushing for the Air Force to investigate the lights. So now, all of a sudden, they get this explanation, and she's not just buying it. So she states, if that is their explanation, then they need to do a reenactment so people can say that's what they saw or not what they saw. Now, Barwood also said the explanation didn't account for all the reports from more than, a few people that the lights appeared to swoop in from the northwestern part of Arizona and kind of hover over the Phoenix area and then head toward Tucson. So she's saying she was talking about the V-shaped, hovering, huge, silent, light craft situation that was going on. So that's what she was alluding to. So she's saying it doesn't account for that in her head and according to what the eyewitnesses saw. Now, UF sightings are absolutely nothing new in Arizona. They're really not new anywhere, guys, like anywhere. So on average, the amount of UFO sightings in the southwest portion of the U.S. is staggering. Now, to give you an idea, just since 1995 period, the reported amount of UFOs, according to the National UFO Reporting Center, and I believe this is for, the United States, was 133,000, and many of these coming from the southwest area. So it's just a huge area. People feel like because of the topography there, clear skies, you have a huge amount of government, you have the Air Force bases, and we'll get into the other items that are out there. You just have a lot of heavy trafficked skies going on there. Does that make sense? Skies going on. And so there's a lot of UFO sightings. There's just a lot of things that are mysterious. And then, and some of which are like, oh, okay, well, it's that, that type of plane or whatever it is. So a lot of sightings are happening and across, I live in Arkansas and we have a lot of sightings here. So it's just across the board. And of course, what was it? not too long ago, you had those sightings. Was it New Jersey that was having, I believe it was drone maybe activity? I don't know. Yeah, I'm remembering just enough to be dangerous there. But anyway, just a lot of activity. Now, the big question, of course, on everyone's minds, and really what Councilwoman Barwood was trying to get to is like, why? Like, what is it? Why is it? Should we be concerned? Is it a safety issue? But of course, the big question is why and where? Where did these lights come from? And there are so many theories, but number one, we've discussed the possibility of military flares. Now, for the witnesses that viewed the lights that were in like that row pattern over the mountain, this does make perfect sense. Like that lines up with what they said was going on, that the flares were being put off over the mountains, and they looked that way because they were kind of falling and then they kind of disappeared. Even Dr. Keytai that saw that mentioned, okay, at first there were 6, and by the time I got my camera, there were 3. So that definition, like the military flare, definitely fit that situation. Now, to the witnesses that saw the large V-shaped craft, they felt like the flare explanation couldn't touch that. It just doesn't fit. The flares produce smoke and they drop down from the sky. And when they're dropping, like sometimes they can drop up to like 8 feet per second, kind of depending on who, what, where, why, wind and altitude and whatever. So, and what they're attached to too. So, and we'll get into that. Now, a report that kind of further backs up this claim as far as the flare is an account told to the New York Times in 1997. So right after this happened, a 21-year-old named Mitch Stanley. So he talks to the Times, and he's an amateur astronomer. So he was living in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is very close to Phoenix. In fact, I have some very good friends. I believe they live in Scottsdale, I believe. Now, this is close. He stated he used a 10-inch Dobsonian mirror telescope and viewed a squadron of fighter planes that night. So he can kind of back up the flare situation or the situation with the Maryland, Air National Guard, okay? That adds up. It just doesn't make sense for the V-shaped situation. So it kind of makes sense for part of it, but not all of it. Now, in 2011, I'm kind of jumping here. So on Friday, October 28th, 2011, during a football game in Scottsdale, Arizona, so again, near Phoenix, there is a video caught by witnesses. So they're actually videoing probably their kids playing football, but they see these lights. So a couple of videos capture 4 bright lights. And they're strange lights that move slowly, and then they're sometimes blinking that last a couple of minutes. And it was posted, so they posted their video on YouTube, received like 50,000 views, caught a lot of people's attention, made the news and all that. So several people that had seen the Phoenix Lights or were aware of the Phoenix Lights, like this is several years later, but people were going back to that. They're like, oh, these are the Phoenix Lights. And people had, of course, all kinds of theories. Like right away, people were throwing out their theories on this, like whether it was aliens or flares or military or whatever it was. Now, it turns out that there was an event that night called the Halloween Balloon Spectacular with a skydiving team called the Arizona Skyhawks. And they literally jumped out of a plane with magnesium flares on them. I guess they turn them on, they're flaring. So it turns out this happening was 15 miles where the football game was going on that night. So this event did mention, people linked this. It got media attention, it got the attention of people, but it also brought up the Phoenix Lights all over again. So it did bring it up. Now, these lights caught, in 2011 were accounted for, unlike the Phoenix Lights. But people did feel at first that they were similar to how the Phoenix Lights looked, except for the actual V-shaped, situation. It didn't fit that situation. Now, in March 2000, 3 Air National Guard planes did try to create the Phoenix Lights event utilizing the military flares. However, the flares looked very different from the V-shaped, UFO that witnesses saw and recorded. So the attempt to recreate this really failed and further solidified for most that the event was truly unexplainable, like the V-shaped event. They still are not getting a viable, explanation here. So they're still just like, no, it was not a flare. Like, bring me something else, but not a flare. Now, if the V-shaped formation wasn't a flare, a second option could be that the craft was perhaps a top secret U.S. aircraft, kind of question mark. Now, in the 1980s, there were many UFO reports around Arizona, and they would typically be identified, by people in the military or whatever as the military plane, the Lockheed F-117 Nighthawk, and the Grumman B-2. Now, the Lockheed was a stealth fighter, and the Grumman was a stealth bomber. Stealth being the key word here. So these, aircrafts were designed to be not detected on radar. Like, that was the point. Like, stealth. Like, they wanted them to be able to fly in and get, information from other countries, like wartime. Like, that was the purpose. And of course, during the 1980s, you did have the Cold War going on. You had the nuclear war going on. So that was the point. Now, these aircrafts were shaped in a V, very V-shaped or quote-unquote boomerang shaped. Obviously, they are not a mile wide. They're not that huge. The wingspan of the B-2 is like 172 feet. So they're big, but they're not a mile. Now, I will say, looking at these, I did look these up, and they are very spacey. They're very UFO-y. I mean, if you're looking at it, like, wow. So that is interesting to me, is that they very much have the look of what these people are seeing. And that, I don't know what that is. I know I was talking to someone just about UFOs and then our minds and such, and how we just see things. Like, sometimes our mind can play tricks on us. Now, obviously, tens of thousands of people getting the same mind trick is weird, but just the fact that, you just see, like, sometimes you'll see something and it's like, oh, like me and Amber were driving. We were driving down the road the other day, and she's like, hold up, I see a man and he's floating. It's a dead body in the creek. And I'm like, okay. So we ended up turning around, and lo and behold, it was a man. He was not dead, but he was kind of in the creek. Anyway, it's amazing what your mind will see or whatever, but, sometimes our mind does play tricks on us. So anyway, but yeah, so these stealth, machines of the 1980s, and I'm sure even more bigger, just more pronounced now, but they're very cool looking. They're very UFO looking. Now, witnesses of the Phoenix Lights, they doubted this theory about the government due to the size of the formations. They just couldn't believe that the government had such an aircraft, and particularly in the 1997 timeframe. Like, they just didn't believe that they had that large of a craft and that quiet of a craft and that slow of a craft. So those three things were like, I don't know. I just don't think we have it. Now, in April 2008, around 8:05 p.m. in Phoenix, there is another sighting of 4 to 5 lights in the North Valley. Again, it's V-shaped and around 3,000 feet in the air. Now, people call this into the police and the Air Force Base. And literally, this is like 11 years after the Phoenix Lights. Now, this time, the triangle does morph. It goes from kind of being triangular shaped into more of a square. And one eyewitness records this event, like it's a 15-minute video of the UFO, okay? Now, however, by the very next day, a man calls in and takes responsibility for the event, and it's deemed a hoax. So he stated he used flares. He attached them evidently to helium balloons and set them off 1 minute apart from each other. It doesn't say why he did this. I don't know if he was trying to recreate or whatever, but I guess he realized, like, the news was coming out, and I'm sure people were talking about the Phoenix Lights and stuff. So he took responsibility. Like, I don't think he meant anything malicious by it, but it definitely had that appearance. So it does back up the fact that, some of those lights that night did very much look like the military flares. So it seems like everybody across the board is like, yeah, that matches, but not this other. So now, with this situation, the 2008 situation being a hoax, now the question on people's mind is theory 3. Could the 1997 event be a hoax as well? Like, could someone have created that? Now, several people after the governor's press conference, they did believe the event was a hoax, especially if they weren't witnesses to it. They just saw the, like, oh yeah, this is a hoax, not to be taken seriously type of thing. Now, the witnesses state there was no way the event could be a hoax, considering the Phoenix Lights covered an area of around 400 miles. So like I said, it kind of started in, we discussed this, it started in like California, Nevada, and then the sightings lasted all the way to 2 a.m. in the morning in Mexico. So it was a big, vast area of coverage. So there would be, to these people, they're like, there's just no way the individuals could pull off that large of a hoax and make it look the way it looked. And additionally, in 2007, among like a 10-year, it's kind of, in 2007, it would have been like the 10-year anniversary of the event. So former, at this time, Governor Five Symington, so he is interviewed and claims now that he did see the Phoenix Lights himself. And in this interview, he states he ditched his security detail on that night of the sightings, and he joined a crowd of sky watchers at what was called Squawk Peak, and he witnessed the V-shaped formation himself. He does allege then that political pressure of downplaying the event in 97 was why he held the funny press conference, and just to make like light of the situation instead of taking it seriously at that time. And even later on in 2021, he would be interviewed again about this whole situation, and he would allege that he was also at that time involved with alleged, I guess not alleged, but federal indictments. So he just felt like he didn't want to align himself as an actual witness to the light. So yeah, so since then he's kind of changed his tune. He has very much said that it happened, it was very real, and it should be taken seriously. So he very much feels like it's not a hoax. And I would say it would be very, very difficult if those lights were a hoax. Again, spanning that kind of territory would be, I would think, very difficult. Like, obviously, if it just happened within the city confines of Phoenix, just like with the 2000 or whatever, the 2011 incident and then the 2008 incident, like that would make sense, but not what actually happened in March of 1997. So now, of course, a fourth option, or theory would be that this is straight up aliens, extraterrestrial, people from outer space, space beings, people from other worlds, whatever you want to call it. Like, that would be another option. Now, obviously, over the years, many, many people have reported alien sightings, like actual alien sightings, or even being abducted by aliens. And so that in 1997 was definitely nothing new. There were tons of events related to that. Even when they studied the areas around Phoenix, like they noticed, and of course these drawings could be anything, but the indigenous people that had lived in Arizona, like way, way, way back, had caves and rock drawings and hieroglyphics or whatever you want to call them. And they looked very much to be talking about, like quote unquote star people or, aliens. So again, aliens, nothing new, definitely. So that's definitely an option that people are like, is this otherworldly, we're not alone type of thing. Some people are, or quote unquote, aliens are maybe monitoring us or looking at what we're doing or whatever, whatever's going on. So definitely the other option. Now, a fifth and final theory would be a government kind of, I say cover up, quote unquote, of military or even other countries for purposes of national security and secrecy. So just knowing what it is, not discussing what it is, for instance, like maybe only top security, maybe not everybody at the Air Force Base knows what truly happened, but some people know, quote unquote. Now, is it, it may not have even been our craft. Maybe if we were capable in 1997, if we were capable of stealth, uh, aircrafts, who else was and what else was, and other countries like Russia, China, whomever, could they have been looking at us, flying over, hovering over, for purposes of nuclear capacity, like looking at that, just spying, just and political things. Like, we know that we have done that to other countries. We are doing it right now. So who knows what kind of, technologies there are, and especially in my head, I guess, that is definitely a viable option. Like, there is an explanation. It was a craft, and it could have even been our craft, but we're not talking about it. Like, no one is going to release it for whatever security reasons there are. Now, in the Arizona area, you do have a lot of top secret bases. Like, of course, you have the Luke Air Force Base there and other bases, but you have Area 51 that is very close by. You have the Edwards Air Force Base, which is not infamous, but famous for a lot of going on trainings and different things, top secret activity. You also have an area called White Sands Missile Range. And of course, you can guess what they're doing. So there are several top secret, places in this area. Like, they're out there for a reason. It's deserted. There's a population, the geography of the area. So there is a lot going on out there in this region. And of course, again, who could be spying on us or looking at our, whatever we're doing, or they're just doing training missions for whatever we are doing, military or politically, okay? It's just all top secret. So that is the other theory. It is just that simple as that. So I will say kind of simple in air quotes. Now, in 2017, news breaks of a secret Pentagon program which investigates unidentified aerial phenomena. That's what they kind of call it now, UAP. Really, it's the same as a UFO. So a New York Post article details work of Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which is a group that had been working on investigating actual military encounters for about the last 10 years, so since 2007. So previously, like in 1997, the military would kind of just say, deny, deny, deny. That's where they're like, I don't know anything about it. I'm not going to tell you anything about it. And then, of course, 4 months later, they're like, it's military flares. But anyway, but now in 2017, the government, quote unquote, is acknowledging events that they don't understand and that they are looking into it. A video is declassified called a Tic Tac video. If you've not seen this video, I'll try to link this on my social medias this week. Like, it is so fascinating. But basically, it's a video taken by a Navy pilot of a UFO flying off the coast of San Diego. And he clearly, this pilot's kind of talking during the video, or he's taking this footage or whatever, but he clearly doesn't know what it is. So this kind of comes out at this time to kind of vindicate people, and so many people that have seen objects that are just not notated. Like, they're just, like, there's no explanation to it. So this does vindicate those people that saw the Phoenix Lights. Like, they're like, you know what? This is like the Tic Tac event. And of course, they may even have, I don't know, I haven't kept up with it, but an explanation for that now. In fact, I did see, now the Tic Tac event, it was like a little capsule, that's what they call it, Tic Tac, but it was like moving so quickly, like just so fast that was, the unbelievable part of it. So basically, no matter what you believe or the where, the why, or whatever, so something definitely happened that night in 1997 that was truly unexplainable. My mind, and this is just my opinion in my mind, I am no authority on anything, but my mind honestly tends to move towards the theory of, a craft possibly unknown even to the United States, maybe from another country, that the government did in fact kind of figure out, and they're just not going to tell us about it yet. Because I know that some things are classified for a certain amount of time, so that might be it, just time. I don't know. Again, that's my theory. I would love to hear yours, but I am truly a skeptic when it comes to like aliens per se. However, I'm open. I would love to go to the Area 51. I would love to have top secret clearance or get all these answers one day. It would be awesome. But bottom line, to this day, nothing other than the flare theory has been issued. And that is also, obviously been dismissed by so many for the most part, for at least for the V-shaped portion of the lights seen, the Phoenix Lights. So, again, this is so fascinating of a story. I did not know about it until I had kind of like looked into UFOs and this popped up. But this is the largest mass sighting. And so it is very fascinating, very interesting. Would love to hear what you guys think about it and what option you think it was. So, yeah. So reach out to me, leave a comment, like, subscribe, all the things. I would appreciate it. And have a great week. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.